Welcome back to another episode of the Collectibles Dad YouTube channel. Today we're talking about Star Wars
Empire is on the verge of success.
collectibles. What do they look like long term? What do we think about them? There are so many options, and now I know a lot of people excited watching the recent show Ahsoka and just all the new Star Wars lore that is kind of coming to fruition here as we watch this show. Disney has been absolutely cranking out this content for Star Wars, and my only concern, I guess, as I watch this is, are they putting it out too fast? You know, you have between Boba Fett and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and then I think there's another trilogy on the way. There is a lot in the works for Star Wars, which on the one hand, it's good that there's so much interest in that content and also speaks to just the size of the brand globally. Now, if we go back in time, I was born in 1981, so I was not alive when the first Star Wars movie came out, but I was certainly around in the 80s, especially the mid-late 80s, as the toys were heating up, which led into the early 2000s where they had the second trilogy. And you got to keep in mind, I mean, there was, a 15 to 20 year break in between the first trilogy and the second trilogy. And now, of course, we've had a third trilogy. And on the back of that third trilogy, we've had all these different shows and so forth, which, while awesome, again, you kind of worry a little bit about fatigue, I think. Star Wars fatigue. But man, I tell you what, if you look at the interest in Star Wars and then, of course, the really cool collectibles, man, there's so many different options here, whether it be the original Kenner action figures and the story behind how Kenner got the licensing for all of it, and just kind of how simple those original action figures were and just how collectible they are in box and out of box. It's wild. And then, of course, you have comic books, you have video games made after Star Wars, you have the cards, or Star Wars cards, newer cards coming out, newer sets that are very popular. So there's a lot going on within Star Wars. And so I look at this, is this a strong long-term hold? I think this brand, you have to ask yourself, there's certain brands, are people going to care about it or know about it in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? There aren't a ton of brands out there in the pop culture space that with confidence you can say, you know what, this stuff is going to be remembered to be around down the road for the next generation. Star Wars, Marvel, of course, DC, although they haven't had the same success as Marvel with the movies and the shows. Everyone knows Superman and Batman. I mean, you just don't see that really changing, and so when you look at collectibles and when we're kind of buying into these collectibles with the hope or expectation that over time they can appreciate in value, and then also just kind of diversifying into physical assets with some of these collectibles pieces, there are some really, really cool auctions. And we have seen, look, people are putting money into Star Wars collectibles. There's pretty big sales of cards, autographed cards, or super refractors on the Star Wars card side. You've got comic books, Star Wars comic books, first appearances that have sold for pretty sizable money. The action figures, the original ones, are in the 5 figures. I think actually there was a 6-figure sale going back a year or so. So there's no doubt that people are diversifying into Star Wars collectibles. Does it continue on, or does it hit some sort of fatigue? For me personally, I would like to get into more Star Wars collectibles. I don't have a lot right now, but in part because it's been so hot with the shows, the movies. There's been so much interest in Star Wars. For me personally, it just felt like, not necessarily a great buying season when you've just got so many people that are already into it. Of course, prices go up based on that. And over the last year or so, we've seen a little bit of a pullback on some really great items. Now, still record-setting prices on a lot of the really, really rare stuff, but there are certain Star Wars collectibles items that I'm going to kind of look into that have cooled off a little bit. I think just because collectibles as a whole, the economy, interest rates rising and all that bit, has pulled everything back a little bit to where people are kind of moving out of collectibles and then sitting money in the bank in their money market account getting 5% or whatever. For me personally, I want to take a closer look at the action figures, because if we look back, that was really the original physical collectible with Star Wars that was collectible. People collecting those action figures, especially in box. So I want to look at graded in-box Star Wars action figures, and they're popular. I do think over time, you look at this as kind of from the aspect of antiques. I look at some of these pop culture collectibles that transcend into multiple generations as kind of my generation's antiques. Instead of going and buying an old trunk or something the way my parents did, these are going to be, for me, I think there's going to be 60, 70-year-old, 80-year-old me's out there that have these antiques, these collectibles. 30 years, it'll be what, 2050? So Star Wars will be almost 70, it'll be 70, 80 years old, the property, the brand. Think about that. Isn't that wild? In 30 years, Star Wars, the original Star Wars will be almost 80 years old. That's incredible to think about. And then when you think about how those collectibles age, the more rare things. So the action figures, the old Kenner action figures in box is what I'm going to really kind of look at and target here, as well as some of the comic books. I think some of the comic books are interesting as well. But I want to hear your thoughts on this. Star Wars collectibles. Do you think that they're really kind of too overly priced right now? Do you think that there is room for growth on these sorts of things? What are your predictions? Please put them in the comments down below. And also, if you've been buying into Star Wars collectibles, where have you focused your attention? Has it been around, the action figures? Has it been around comic books? Has it been around cards, trading cards? Where have you been on this? Let me know. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.